We've got a lot to digest on this afternoon. We've heard about public financing this morning within the framework of INFFs. We're going to switch focus now to look at unlocking private finance. We all know that we need to unlock impactful private finance at scale to see the progress that we want. And here with the answers, with a fantastic panel, is my colleague Shebnam Saner, who's the head of UNDP's private finance offer. Over to you, Shebnam.
Here, yes. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Now, a lot of people before this session was telling me, oh, it's the hardest after lunch. How are you going to get people's attention? It's going to be hard for us. So hopefully, I will start to get your attention. But no doubt that when you hear the panelists, because I spoke with them a little bit before we start, you know, amazing people, very seasoned panelists, so you're going to hear a lot of interesting things. So it's my privilege to welcome you to this session today. We are going to hear perspectives from different panelists with different backgrounds on the role of private finance and what it takes really to direct private finance, private capital to the markets where it's needed the most, but equally important, what it means to align private finance with the SDGs, right? So what I notice in similar gatherings everywhere is that we are coming from different backgrounds, from different organizations, with different goals, different mandates. But one thing in common here is we are all change makers. Change is an important word. We are all change makers. I see it that way because we are here spending 2 days in here discussing these issues and try to change something. Everybody is trying to change something within their organization, outside of our organization, with our partners, irregardless and irrelevant of the age level or the backgrounds that we are coming from, right? We are trying to change something. And that change, hopefully, that's our hope, will put us to the path to a more sustainable world for the future. And in the context of today's discussion, what we are trying to change is to find out what we need to change and how we need to change to actually allow private finance to flow to the areas where it's needed the most and most impactful. And the scale of challenge is undeniable, and especially when we think about there are $100 trillion assets under management globally, and only 6% of it is invested in developing markets, let alone the impact angle. We don't even know whether these investments are actually impactful or not. So without talking more, we'll hear from the panelists on the challenges that they see and how we can scale up finance flows to the emerging markets. And equally important, the paradigm shift now that from ESG-based frameworks to more sustainability and impact-based frameworks and the significance of it, and obviously how integrated national financing frameworks actually allow a space for this and bring everything together. So I'll invite first Antti Karhunen, the Director for Sustainable Finance, Investment and Jobs, Economy that Works for the People from European Commission. Welcome, Antti. Mr. Luhur Fajar, Project Development and Matchmaking Specialist, National SDGs Secretariat, Ministry of National Planning, Indonesia. Ms. Etamor Glover, CEO of Impact Investors Foundation, Nigeria. Mr. Javier Garcia, ISO Vice President, Spain, and Director General, Spanish Association for Standardization. And Mr. Fernando Jimenez Ontiveros, which I had a beautiful conversation before we start, Director for Multilateral, Horizontal, and Financial Cooperation, Spanish Development Agency. Welcome. So, Antti, I want to start with you. Global Gateway which you may want to elaborate a little bit more, is the new European strategy and aims to mobilize 300 billion by 2020 for major investments in high-quality infrastructure. And obviously, accelerating private finance is a big part and significant part of this mobilizing finance. So what is the implementation of the Global Gateway? And what is the role of the INFF in scaling private financing towards developing countries?
Yes, thank you, Sebnem, and good afternoon to all of you. And I hope you enjoyed the lunch and it doesn't make you sleep too much. We try to keep you awake. I'm taking actually your point, Sebnem, on change makers, because obviously working with the private sector seriously started in Addis 10 years ago, and it was part of the outcome there. And that's also the history for the European Union, I think, to start really working with the private sector. And it's that journey that I think I want to enlighten a little bit. Having said that, I also want to start by saying that we are those who, as Markus has said, took the leap of faith with the INFFs from the very beginning, and we are very big supporters of that. And we really see the INFFs as a tool that has a great potential in aligning the country's financial flows, whether they are domestic, international, public, and private, and with the SDGs. And that's, of course, a very crucial and timely task. We know how much off track we are. So private financial flows are the largest and the most critical source of financing to achieve our common goals. And if we were to reach the scale and the impact that we need, we must really engage with the private sector and also deploy financial instruments that can help crowding in private investors. And that's precisely what the Global Gateway of the European Union is designed to do. It's our delivery mechanism for the SDGs, and it is supported by a rather important guarantee and blended finance offer. And therefore, I'd like to say a few words about that journey and what is our experience on the Global Gateway. So Global Gateway is a 300 billion offer to our partner countries to finance high quality and sustainable investment with focus on infrastructure, but both on hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure. So the idea is that in the first place, and I'd like to underline that, is that we agree with our partner countries on the priorities, where they are and what we should be doing together. It's the partnership approach that is very prevalent there. That's the first step. And we don't want to be everywhere. We don't want to do everything in a country. But we try to focus on where we can have impact, where we can be transformative. And that's very important because we are a rather large player. Our country and Belarus have been big, and perhaps the past has been a little bit of scattered and perhaps also variable results in terms of what impact we've. So we try to focus. The financial strategy of the Global Gateway is really based on leveraging the combined resources of both the public and the private sectors by all Team Europe actors. We offer guarantees to the EIB, to the EBRD, and the European DFIs, to the IFC, AFDB as well, among others. And then they in turn offer finance to private sector, which can help, which they can do with the help of our de-risking. So we have about 40 billion euros of guarantee capacity for 7 years, 2021-27. And with that, we aim to unlock investments at the level of around 135 billion. We are actually overall in the global gateway already, because that is not just our EU budget, it's also our member states and the Team Europe budget. So we are already at the level of having unlocked 179 billion was the last figure. So it is moving forward very well, and the results are already seen. There's one point I also would like to highlight, and I think there's a reason for that. So as EU, we are not only working on global gateway investments. We do have a very, very strong focus on fragile countries as well, on places where global gateway investments may not be the best suited tool to work. So there's a very dedicated effort, and I'd just like to highlight this because sometimes there is a fear that EU is focusing too much on investments and forgetting the more difficult places. That said, if we look at the fragile countries, even in them mostly we can work on global gateway investments. There are some countries where it's very difficult actually, but in most fragile settings we can, I would claim, work on private sector as well. Indeed, then another element there would be that whilst we are working on investments and trying to use our leverage tools to de-risk financial side of investments, it's a very comprehensive effort that we try to do. We try to, in addition to de-risking, to work on the enabling environment with the governments on structural and regulatory systems, so that we have an attractive place to attract quality investments. And for this we have, I think, an important offer of technical assistance in various forms, and also our budget support operations are more and more geared towards investment climate type of activities. So we place a strong emphasis on reforms undertaken by our partners and strengthening the economic governance and domestic revenue mobilization and building more efficient public finance management systems. So there's a couple of elements maybe in the PFM area which are worth mentioning in terms of unlocking private finance. One is public procurement systems. This is crucial for value for money for public investments and also for the local private sector to thrive. Another one is really the budget credibility, predictability and transparency, which are really key for ensuring sustainability of public investments and also for fostering investor confidence. So that's why EU is continuing to support capacity building in partner countries with a comprehensive approach covering these issues, both on the revenue and expenditure side of the finance. And as partner countries make progress with their INFFs and on implementing the reforms, we are really ready to continue the support as an EU, and thereby then also, in a sense, creating the environment to investment through the global gateway. Good budgetary planning through INFFs can really be extremely helpful in our view. It will catalyze and unlock private finance. Having said all this, I think it's really important to bear in mind that, and we've discussed it a little bit bilaterally with some colleagues already, engaging with the private sector directly is key. That is also the key, of course, to do with the DFIs and with the MDBs and that we are doing. That is a little bit more simple, but on private sector we really need to find a way of getting across. So what we are trying to do, we have a business advisory group for Global Gateway. More than 60 businesses were picked through a call for expression of interest to participate, and with them we can sort of vet strategic issues that are on the minds of the business and get their messages straight from the horse's mouth, if you wish. And then we try to see whether we can follow suit on those. For example, procurement issues have become very, very prevalent. Access to information, how do you use our tools, these kind of issues are clearly preoccupying the private sector. So just really wanted to highlight the fact that it's key to engage directly. There's another way we are trying to reach the private sector, both the local private sector and the European private sector, is through the business fora that we do on a rolling basis in the partner countries this year. For example, we have Ghana and Kenya in May and Nepal in October, and I would like to already, extend an invitation to any of you who want to join. These are quite interesting events. We've done them for some years, and I think they're quite successful in bringing the government and the business together. So I think I'd like to just then, perhaps not to speak too long, finally talk a little bit about the sustainable finance, which is an area which you alluded to and where we are investing quite heavily. So I'd like to put on a pedestal the Global Green Bond Initiative, which is a flagship under our Global Gateway strategy, and through which we are aiming to scale up green bonds in partner countries in order to finance sustainable infrastructure. And we are working on this with a wide team of Team Europe participation, EIB at the lead, and a number of European DFIs also joining the forces with us. But it's not just the green bonds itself, it's also the work on the interoperable sustainable finance frameworks, and there is a lot of advisory work to be done. We are working very closely with UNDP, and we're very grateful for that collaboration through Sustainable Finance Advisory Hub, to help building these frameworks in the partner countries, and we are dedicating technical assistance for this. Finally, we are also trying to develop the cutting-edge policy making at the same time as we are heavily investing on the ground and doing concrete things. We had a high-level expert group on sustainable finance, which has given recommendations for us last year, and we are this year then coming up with the comprehensive strategy document with our new European Commission on scaling up private finance in low and middle income countries for sustainable investments under Global Gateway, and that I think will be an interesting document building on the work and the recommendations that we've already done. So I'd like to leave it at that, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It's fantastic to be in Barcelona. Thank you.
Thank you, Antti. It's really interesting to hear about all these details. Indeed, this very ambitious and comprehensive plan of the EU. And wow, it's 179 billion already. It's exciting to hear that as well. So from this global perspective, I want to turn to you, Luhur, Indonesia. So Indonesia has been one of the early movers in sustainable finance in Asia Pacific. We have worked on things together, such as SDG investor maps. Now you're doing the pipeline building work in Asia Pacific. There's a lot of some thematic bond issuances in Indonesia. So my question to you is, how is the integrated financing approach actually used to bring all these different initiatives together? And what is the lessons learned from the country perspective?
Thank you, Sepnam. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thanks to our colleagues from the UNDP who successfully managed this event, actually, and also to thanks also to distinguished panelists and participants. This meeting is very crucial for us to discuss further the progress and the challenges of sustainable development financings. Before sharing about our policy implementations to unlock the private finance and answer the Sepnem's questions, I would like to give a short context of our country. In Indonesia, actually, the Ministry of National Development Planning, or Bappenas, and the UNDP had made assessments to the financing framework since 2020. And in order to accelerate the sustainable financing developments. And finally, we launched together with the UNDP, we launched the INFF in the G20 meeting in Bali in 2022, actually. The ultimate aim of Indonesia INFF is to facilitate a holistic approach to financing policy formulations, implementations, as well as integrating all relevant financial instruments, actually. The frameworks plays two significant roles. First is to strengthen coherence across financing policies. We know today's keywords is coherence, 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 from what I heard today. Both publics and private finance. And also the second is to stand as docking stations, which streamlines and builds on what already there. We don't make a new reinventing the things, but we streamlines and builds what are already in the area. And then we believe that the financing strategies are the core of the INFF, and given the nature of our country economy, right financings, I mean the most appropriate financial instruments is very, very vital for the SDG finance. Of these financing strategies, there may be several that relate to this session's discussion, I think. First is to improve the public spending effectiveness, to incentivize the funds mobilizations. This is very important. For example, as Auntie said, mentioned before, the risking facility, capacity building, and many others that government can do to attract the private finance mobilizations. And then second, develop green banking solutions for sustainable finance, considering the short and long-term liquidity and risk that they have to manage. And then third is design more effective blended finance mechanisms. We know that are many mechanisms, examples of blended finance, but it's still challenging to make it happens in many cases. And then as well as all to mobilize the impact investments capital. And also the last but also important is to align the philanthropy and family foundations finance and faith-based financings with the SDGs. We should not forget that they have also have a big role in participating in financing the SDGs effort. Basically, we have three main concrete actions in implementing these strategies. First, from our experiences, first is to align the SDGs with the National Development Plan. So we can have same priorities at the national, local, and sector levels. This is very important to bring all together in the same languages and the same actions to the sustainable developments. We also, in the long term, we have a President's vision and missions as a guidance for the futures. And then, besides the tax revenue, talking about the government's or the public's finance optimizations, in mobilizing the additional capital is also crucial to conduct or to develop quite strong, let's say what Auntie says, government's securities. And we know Indonesia has been successfully issued the SDG bonds, green sukuk, and also the samurai blue bonds under the Japanese samurai bonds. And then second is developing stronger investment ecosystems, which aims to direct the private capital to finance impact and social enterprises. In this regard, the project curations and pipeline developments are very fundamental to improve the investment readiness, as well as to meet the investors' requirements, because they have their own due diligence processes. Alignment with the SDGs, national, regional, and sector development plans are among the parameters we use to conduct these project curations and pipeline developments. So we also have managed to operationalize the SDGs funding setup in Indonesia, which managing all of the everything about the project curations and pipeline developments. Private projects and pipeline developments, not the government's programs and actions. So, and then last year, our government issued the Minister of National Development Planning regulations on innovative financings, actually, which aim to support the mobilization of private finance for the SDGs specifically. Mobilizing catalytic funding. Catalytic fund is one of the many approaches we use for the implementations. For example, we have conduct cooperations, close cooperation with the corporate. To name is the Unilever's, UK FCDO, and EY to conduct a program and provide managed catalytic funds for impact enterprises in 3 sectors: digital health, regenerative farming, and water sectors. So another examples of these catalytic fund is the Indonesia Impact Funds, as the private-led investment fund supporting the growth of the impact ventures in Indonesia to accelerate the SDGs achievement, actually. Recently, we are working together with WWF and the DFCD, Dutch Funds for Climate Developments, to mobilize climate adaptations finance. So we are now looking for a project that are focused on the climate adaptations in Indonesia, and then the and the DFCD will provide the concessional funds and also the capital funds. So it's kind of blended finance instruments in this area. All of these are based on the result of SDG investor mapping that was conducted in, if I'm not mistaken, in 2020 and 2021. Is a cooperation between Ministry of National Development Planning, UNDP Indonesia, and also the Ministry of Investments. The mapping identified some sectors which are aligned with the government development priorities, and also potentials on the investments, on the investors' lens, actually. Also, we have developed SDG. After that, we developed the SDG investment dashboard, which provide more details information about the curated projects, investor profiles, as well as partners that contributed to the SDGs. The platform is designed to improve the transparency and accountability in the process, from identifications, project executions, and more importantly, in the monitoring and evaluations. This is very vital to avoid the SDG washing. I think I'll stop here, Sernem, and looking forward to having discussions with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Luhur. Great, looking forward to hear more about the pipeline work in Indonesia in the future. But you referenced several times the impact, bringing family offices, philanthropy to the impact space. And finally, you mentioned the SDG washing, which will give me a great segue to talk more about the aligning and impact piece of things. So aligning investment is obviously critical. And what we mean by aligning is really thinking about impact at the core of everything that we do. And actually, Zero Draft of the outcome document openly refers and calls private sector to mainstream impact into their management practices. And what it means is, it means change. And Mahmoud in the morning mentioned behavioral change, so it means behavioral change, and this needs change makers. And Etemor here is one of the change makers that I've ever seen in my life. So Etemor, can you a little bit talk about your foundation and your significant work around building an effective investment ecosystem in Nigeria that supports really the growth of impact investment. And I don't want to say impact investment, but investment that is impactful in the country.
Thank you very much, Sednam, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me here to talk about my work and how we're working to grow impact investment in our ecosystem in Nigeria and what we can share from our learnings. The Impact Investors Foundation is a non-profit organization established as a multi-stakeholder group driven largely by different private sectors. And our aim is to grow and build a very impactful ecosystem where impact is at the heart of everything that we do. In 2019, we were formed, and it was quite interesting at the time when we talked about impact investing and the notion people would think that impact investing was either below market rate, it was charity, foundation, and all of that. And so people were removed from what impact investment meant and what it tried to achieve. And we identified key areas where we wanted to focus on in our initiative. One was knowledge sharing and networking, capacity building, policy advocacy. And through our knowledge sharing and networking, we were able to engage with multiple stakeholders in defining at the very basic terms what impact investment meant, what it sought to achieve. And it didn't mean that there had to be trade-offs between making profit and as well as, financial returns for investors. We struggled because there wasn't any data available to prove to investors returns, demonstrable returns in investment. So we started gathering data, doing research, engaging with governments, private sector stakeholders, investors, DFIs, brought everyone to the table to look at the opportunities, taking lessons from other countries. We became part of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, now called GSG Impact, and their role is to build national advisory boards, now national partners, interested in addressing barriers and impact investment in their market. So we came up with homegrown solutions, identifying 4 areas we wanted to address in our market. One was to strengthen the gaps in the supply of impact capital in Nigeria. Currently, in most African countries, we see foreign development finance being deployed. Mostly 80% of the impact capital deployed in Nigeria are from international development finance, right? 20% came from local investors and very small from institutional investors. So we needed to address that. I'll talk about how we address that. Secondly, too, was the low pipeline of investment-ready businesses. Third was the weak intermediary actors who were not able to move monies at the speed and velocities that were required in our markets, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, policies that could unlock more impactful investment, incentivizing more institutional investors. So those were some of the recommendations that came when we brought stakeholders together to discuss the opportunities in growing the impact investment space. It's interesting to see the learnings we got from the Global Steering Group, what all other people were doing in their markets, and how we could contextualize some of this to suit our local condition. And the first area was the gap in the supply side of capital in our market. How do we ensure that the market infrastructure particularly can mobilize capital that was suited for the market? Your average ticket size at the time we researched that we would see being deployed in the market was between 2 to 5 million. And from the DFIs, about 50 to 60 million. The market wasn't ready to absorb those kinds of capital. Secondly, was the fact that it was in foreign denomination, which exposed the local businesses to foreign exchange risk. So we looked at designing a vehicle for our market, which is the Wholesale Impact Investment Fund, a $1 billion fund of funds, to provide the ticket sizing that was right for our market. We wanted to create a vehicle that could attract local institutional investors to also participate in investing in such a vehicle. We also wanted the government to participate by giving the anchor funding to it. So leveraging relationship with the government, we were able to, one, create that awareness of impact investment, ensuring that the focus of the expected outcomes was in alignment to the national development priorities, and also was also part of the INFF goal in terms of ramping up or mobilizing local capital. So we got the commitment from our government to provide 50% of the first close of the fund, which is 100 million, bringing in 50% of it was $50 million. So having those kinds of solutions did send a signal to the market and private sector that, one, the government is ready to support the growth of impact investment. And secondly, having the conversations with pension funds administrators, other institutional investors was really pivotal to us, because the pension funds up to this time were a bit skeptical when it comes to investing in sustainability projects or impact projects. In the last roundtable we had with them last November, because, one, the government was providing de-risking financing, they were interested. We had regulators in the room to be a part of the conversation, and the regulators were happy to consider easing off some of the bottlenecks and barriers to unlock investment from the pension funds. So we've been actively engaging with multi-stakeholder groups to ensure that we have the private sector involved in impact and also sustainable financing. And finally, we understood that policy has a role to play. In our investigation and research, it's not the absence of policy, more is the implementation of policies and having the right incentives to incentivize pension funds, other institutional investors into the space that was missing. And policies didn't even recognize impact investment as an investment strategy or as an asset class that could unlock capital adequately from the private sector. So while we are engaged with the public sector, I will say that we've been quite effective in engaging at subnational and national levels, and we've gotten commitments from the government at subnational level, Lagos State, our commercial capital. We've also gotten commitment from the federal government through the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, being the champion of impact investing. They champion impact investment working with us. We've been able to have several capacity building training with 40 ministries, departments, and agencies to understand innovative financing, impact investments, the wholesale impact investment fund. So working with such ministries and then telling them the need for policies to be transformative, policies to incentivize the private sector is where we're currently with the national government. We also had a conversation last year with the National Assembly, with the Deputy Speaker in partnership with the National Philanthropy Office, and we're working on drafting the first legislation for impact investment in Nigeria. Hopefully, all of this should mainstream impact investing, unlock more capital from the private sector, and really to grow impact investing not only in Nigeria, but across the continent. We're working with other partners on the continent of Africa in creating similar solutions. In Ghana, we have the Chigaba Fund, which is a fund of fund, with the participation of the pension funds in Ghana, which is quite interesting to see in Ghana, the regulation is able to allow pension funds to invest in impact. We're seeing similar structures in Zambia coming up. So what are we trying to say is that we're positioning Africa for the private sector in Africa to participate in aligning financing for the SDGs and to establish the SDGs. I could share more about this, but I'll just pause now to give other people opportunity to speak to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Etamor. So you talked about your in-depth research. You talked about the need for policy to incentivize impact investment, which is very right. But I'm sure you have seen also within, among the private sector also how to actually invest impactfully, right? It's, there are confusion about what it is. There's a lot of different frameworks and standards and reporting frameworks for impact. So it's a confusion that, I know you experienced and we also experienced. So from what you have said, the integrity of the claims are really important. Investing impactfully is really important. But this brings me into how do we make sure the integrity is there, right? There are now majority of global investors, 75%, I think, track their portfolios against SDGs. This reflects an increased alignment between finance and sustainable development, at least the will to increase the alignment. But again, to your point also, Luhur, we have to be lookout on the impact washing. And zero draft of the outcome document calls for standard setters to harmonize voluntary impact standards. And this brings me to Javier, who is from ISO, the largest standard setting body. Javier, ISO and UNDP have recently launched the guidelines for the SDGs in September in Colombia. This is to guide organizations and businesses to align their strategies with the SDGs, and that will lead to global management system standards for the SDGs, hopefully next year. So in your opinion and your experience in ISO, how will these guidelines help in standardization and scaling private financing towards the SDGs?
Thank you. Does this work? Yeah. Thank you, Shebnem. Thank you very much for inviting ISO to this session. ISO is the International Standards Organization. Can I ask you just also to ensure that we are all in the room and with the coffee and everything? How many of you have heard about ISO? Please raise your hand. Oh, many. That's good. That's good. How many of you are familiar, because many of you are from different countries around the world, familiar with your national standardization organization? En Colombia, ¿conoces el ICONTEC? El Instituto Colombiano de Normas Técnicas? So, good, that's very good. I have the privilege to lead, I'm the CEO of the Spanish member of ISO, UNE, it's called, the Spanish Standards Organization. So, and how many of you have heard about ISO 9001? Still quite a good number of you. Why I ask this? Because ISO 9001 has certainly been a standard that today is a commodity for any organization that wants to trade globally or even locally. And there's millions of companies worldwide that have implemented that one standard, ISO 9001. Why is that important? Because this document, these guidelines, and the future standard that will see the light by the end of this year or early next year on aligning the company's strategy with the SDGs follows exactly the same structure of ISO 9001. And this should, and this is the hope that we have in this joint project between UNDP and ISO, this should help organizations of any type, of any size, anywhere in the world that has already implemented an ISO 9001 standard to evolve in their vision, in their challenge of addressing sustainability and SDGs in particular. So 9001 was published, the first version was published in '86. We are a long way from that, but as I said, these challenges that organizations are facing have evolved as time goes by. It was quality at the time. ISO 9001, by the way, is the management system standard for quality management in organization. Quality was a challenge, still is a challenge in many regions of the world, many countries, but was a big challenge some decades ago. Then we had environmental management, another ISO code I will not say to you not to confuse. Innovation management. Only last year we published an ISO standard on gender equal opportunities in organizations. So these are the challenges that business is facing and that the ISO system is giving a solution to address through the development of these standards. Who develops those standards? It's not myself, it's the businesses themselves. Only us in Spain, we have as experts from companies in our national technical committees over 12,000 professionals from companies developing those standards. So it is business developing the solutions they need to address their challenges. And this is the case when we come to sustainability, to sustainable development. Standards, international standards in general, I mean, they're clearly a common language first for all parties to understand each other. We take this for granted in many cases, but I'm sure you face this same challenge when approaching others slightly outside your circle, no, or your closest business circle. So a language where investors, where business, authorities, financial institutions understand each other is so fundamental. This is the first step of these documents that we have developed. I think it was mentioned before, I don't know if it was you, Shebnen, at the introduction or some of the other colleagues, transparency, accountability, measurable outputs. This is so important, so critical when implementing one of these ISO management system standards. Why I insist so much on the surname management system? Because they are certifiable. A third-party auditing company that goes and verifies the fulfillment of the requirements of the standard. And again, I asked you before if you were familiar with the national standards organizations in your countries. How many of you have heard the concept of national quality infrastructure? Hey, much less, much less. No, that's, well, this is precisely one of the concepts I wanted to highlight, national quality infrastructure. This is the standards developers, but there is also the certification companies, and there is also the accreditation bodies that verify that certifiers work on the same level field and applying the same rules so that the result of that certification process really provides the trust that the market needs. National quality infrastructure. You got it all in your countries. Just look for your metrology institute, your accreditation body, your certification companies, and of course your standards organization. Certification is something that business looks for due to different reasons. In many cases, to demonstrate commitment to their stakeholders. And in this area of sustainability, clearly that is one of the motivations. They want to show to their stakeholders commitment on this sustainability challenge. This is a way also to demonstrate and to generate trust to their partners, to their customers, to their investors. So through that certification, through that third-party verification of their fulfillment of those standards, they provide that guarantee to the marketplace. A standard on the SDG implementation following the same structure of the ISO 9001, which is what we are developing together, ISO and UNDP, is clearly embedding sustainability and sustainable development into global business operations. This is what it is about. It's organizations that have incorporated into their strategies sustainable development to have to use this tool to demonstrate their commitment. And the structure of these standards is very simple. I mean, if you get a hold of that standard sooner or later, you will see it's very simple. It's a cycle of continuous improvement. Plan, do, checked, act. Checking is precisely where all the indicators, where all the KPIs, where all the measurement takes place. And this is, again, in a circle of continuous improvement, what provides certainty and leads to better disclosure. And this element of better disclosure is a key one when looking on how to promote the use of this standard and how to get it to maximize its return from the private sector. And I insist on that element of better disclosure because there are several regions worldwide where sustainability disclosure is mandatory or is becoming mandatory, and this clearly implies that those leading business that are committed to sustainability are now going to have an additional motivation, which is legal compliance, to go into the use of this type of standards to demonstrate their compliance with those regulations on sustainability reporting, in addition to, as has been mentioned before, obviously, access to finance through different mechanisms. Those leading companies are tractors to their providers because all these disclosure, sustainability disclosure frameworks apply to their whole value chain. So it's that tractor element of the leading companies on SMEs, which is the majority of companies worldwide in any country, is also going to generate that domino effect somehow into involving the private sector in the implementation of this standard and the impact that it will have in the market. What I would like to ask from those of you here representing authorities in your countries is please consider awareness raising about the existence of this standard, and for that we're going to keep on working with UNDP definitely. Consider providing to organizations, to those companies in your countries, the capacities to know more about this standard and to know how to implement it. And I would go even further, and it was mentioned by the colleague from the European Commission before, public procurement is definitely a lever in this field. There is no, at least in Spain I'm much more familiar, there is no public tender to which an organization would apply without complying with an ISO 9001 standard. So imagine the impact that it would have to incorporate in that public procurement a request for an SDG-oriented or sustainability-oriented compliance with a certain standard or similar. That is something that companies will need support to implement. And I don't know if this is the place to do it or not, but please allow me to also ask for the necessary funding to support those organizations that want to move along this path to get the necessary consultancy and funds as well for the corresponding certification. So all in all, I think that we have here with this project that together UNDP and ISO are developing a very powerful lever to really get private business into full deployment of sustainable development. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Javier. Very hopeful, very inspiring. I mean, I have really nothing to add. Just looking forward to our partnership and getting this management system standards out early 2026, hopefully. With that said, I'm turning to Fernando. The last but definitely not least, Spain. Talk about the significant increasing support of Spain and commitment to development financing. And you are also in the process of evolving the financing instrument into a new fund. So can you tell us a little bit more about how this will unlock or further unlock investment, sustainable investment in the countries that you're partnering with. And as the hosts of the conference, the FFD4 in Seville later this year, what is the opportunity that you see for the FFD outcome to help take sustainable private investment to the level that we need to achieve the SDGs by 2030?
¿Se oye? Sí. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to participate in this meeting of INFF because I see that we are absolutely aligned. I think that we are insisting all of us in the natural and necessary steps to really mobilize private sector. I think I would define that like a value of chain of support to private sector mobilization. At the top of it, everybody has talked about the high-level political dialogue, and I'll try to go from the macro to the meso to the micro. No? But definitely, I was particularly pleased to hear my colleagues from Nigeria and Indonesia, because this is that really is very encouraging, because that shows that I think we are on the right path. We passed a law basically in 2023, a new law for international cooperation. The previous one dating from 23 years ago, so it was about time to have a new one. No? And clearly, we are all moving, I believe, from a logic of financing to a logic of partnership. No? Even the Commission has changed from DEFCO to international partnerships. And clearly, we are trying to change our chip to work in a different manner in our agency. Particularly that has crystallized in basically a new fund for financial cooperation, a new instrument that has several issues that I think will go in the direction of promoting private sector. On the first of all, we work a lot of priority partners for Spain are middle-income countries. And they are actually excellent partners, can be very potential and excellent partners to precise leverage private sector. I love very much in your presentations that typically you talk about international private sector and trillions, but I think local, domestic private sector, mobilizing, de-risking, knowing, getting local, I think that's critical, and congratulations for that. What can we add? I used to work for the Inter-American Development Bank, and sometimes people will come and say, listen, Fernando, if this project is financially and commercially viable, why are you supporting it? And if it is not, why are you supporting it? No? So, and I think it talks about the additionality, and that's in a nutshell what I tried to share some ideas that are not new, that you all know better than I, but I'll try to put even an example or two of how we are trying to do that. No? And I think the additionality is linked to acceleration. I think that probably the challenge of every administration, of every public agency, of every MDB, is the externalities that are linked to really public goods and to things like impact investing, for example. No? So what I think going from the high top political level dialogue, we change our legislation, our regulation, I would say, of our financial instrument so that we will be able to do policy-based loans or development policy loans, as the World Bank says. Because, as my colleague from the Commission said, it's critical really to change the regulatory environment. I think, frankly, there are aspects that are critical, that are like the interoperability of taxonomies. I was in the last FIX conference, I was with the Minister of Finance of Rwanda, and she was telling me, Fernando, you are inflicting upon us regulations that not even Denmark, perhaps, or Spain complies with. I mean, I think there is a critical debate now in the European Union and in Spain between, of course, we don't want to give up the rigor and the values and everything that has to do with that governs our cooperation policy. But at the same time, we need to frankly simplify, have more flexible instruments, more flexible regulation, and that's what we're trying to do. Another thing, I mean, a private sector operation, you cannot take 2 years to have it approved, because then there will be a negative selection. Only the operations that cannot find finance anywhere will be able to wait for that kind of time. So we, with the new fund, we're trying to streamline procedures, to be more flexible. ODA is very important, but it's like, frankly, if you would judge the quality of health in a country by the number of hospital beds, it's important, of course, but there are many other elements or instruments, and we all know that there are a lot of operations, projects that actually have a development impact, but they're not registered as ODA. We had that restriction. Now we can work with TOSD and other indicators. So we will be able to work and to provide technical assistance and finance, even to low, medium income countries that are not ODA eligible, which is good, because sometimes we were with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Benin 2 days ago in Spain, in Madrid. And it's the perfect nightmare, because you are, all of a sudden, hey, we have the graduation. Now we are middle income. And then from Tuesday to Wednesday, you no longer have concessionality of 45%, only 25. So, because the big rating agencies consider that Africa, for instance, is a country, and there is, Morocco is the same that Benin or Ghana or South Africa. So there is and that takes me to the next step. We had the high-level political dialogue. I think we can help de-risk. The perception of risk is exacerbated, and I think we need to be more there a laboratory than a factory. I mean, sometimes it's very tempting for organizations like my organization or the Commission, sorry, or everybody, to measure the impact in terms of numbers. Hey, numbers will not take us there. Even if all countries would comply today with 0.7% of GDP as ODA, it would be less than 1/10 of the financial gap that we have after. It's 4 or 5 trillion, it depends how you calculate it. So, de-risking, how do we de-risk? We support totally, we're completely aligned with Global Gateway, and also you mentioned the global, the green GGBI, this company, and we will be putting in 100 million euros, Spain, to help and buy environmental bonds but again, this must be linked to really prudential, and I mean, Basel is too conservative, and it frankly doesn't encourage a lot private sector investment. So I cannot sufficiently stress the importance of regulatory environment. Guarantees are important, and I'm not saying no, but it's not the only instrument, because the guarantees, basically what they do is they reduce the amount of the loss, but not the probability of that loss. When I tried to really approach commercial banks in Spain, they would say, no, unless you guarantee me 99%, I won't go to Africa. I said, first, Africa is not a country, and second, what is the risk? I mean, then I'm a civil servant, but I'm more risk. You're more risk averse than I. So together with the guarantees sometimes require also the depth of capital markets, regulation. I mean, not all countries are up to meet the standards for that, no? Nor there is a rating. Rating tends to be a very complicated issue when you try to test new things. But together with that, in our experience, for instance, the first losses is something, or what we do, for instance, and I will put 2 examples. With our concessionality, and we can be extremely concessional, we let the private sectors have more return. And that leads me to the next, technical assistance. Technical assistance is fundamental, again, to accelerate things, also to make projects more bankable, to strengthen. I think at some point we need to be like an honest broker. I think that sometimes in Europe, typically different agents or actors naturally sit around the table. That's not always the case in an emerging economy, and I think we can play an important part as an honest broker, bringing people together. So technical assistance, I believe, is also critical, blending it with first losses and with other instruments. I will finish by mentioning something that I think that I have been experiencing in Spain in particular. I don't want to talk about other countries, but in Spain, I think the private sector is evolving very rapidly, from corporate philanthropy to corporate social responsibility to now a new business model that, together with risk and return, has impact as a tremendous element. And in our experience, there are more and more family offices, small investors, pension funds, financial institutions that really want, and the market values that, really work into impact investment. So we're working a lot together with ESG, that was mentioned, and with Spain NAP. And in our road to Seville, we will be having, for the second time now, a conference on impact investment. We already have, we are the new kids in the block. We started that not too long ago, but we already have two very interesting examples. One is called Fondo Ruma. In Fondo Ruma, with 20 million euros from us and 25 from the Commission, we leverage 90 million from Spanish institutional investors, from CaixaBank and Allianz. And now we are scaling that up to a Quali Fund, which is also following the same principle, but bringing, for the first time, we were able to, after 4 years, to bring the Green Climate Fund. And basically, the Green Climate Fund is going to bring $25 million for first losses, because it is linked to developing tools for resilience, agricultural resilience and adaptation to climate finance. And it will be a program where we will be leveraging 215 million euros in private funds, and for a total of 300. And we are doing something interesting, I believe, also. We are trying to match. We will be investing in the capital of Indian small companies that provide these kind of tools for small farmers, and brokering their relations with cooperatives and small farmer organizations in Latin America. So that's basically what I had to say. Private sector is essential, and I think if only 5 years ago it would be unthinkable to believe that in an operation with the public sector, the private sector would add 200 million euros. Thank you.
Thanks, Fernando. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any questions. I have a lot of questions too, which I'll catch all the panelists. I'm sure you can catch them as well today and tomorrow, if they're here tomorrow as well. Thank you so much. Just want to conclude by saying, I mean, INFFs has been a game changer. We talked a lot about public finance, but obviously it's a game changer also for catalyzing private finance for the SDGs as well. So closing the panel, thank you so much for coming. Hopefully it was interesting for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shebnem, and thank you to our panelists. We didn't have time for questions during the panel, but we have coffee now, so do grab a coffee, direct your questions to them. We'll come back in 20 minutes for the next session on SDG bonds. Thank you.